All right, welcome everyone to the October meeting of the Climate Action Planning Committee. It's good to see you all. And would like to begin the meeting with a public comment period. Is there anyone on Zoom or in the room? Stephen. Hello.
Hey, no one in the room.
No one on Zoom, no one in the room. Okay, so we will move past public comments. And then the next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the September meeting. Did everybody have a chance to review any comments or feedback? Okay.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Matt Kamichi. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Maggie says aye. All right. So we can record. I think we just need to record who voted what, but everybody.
So Matt was second and Arthur, please, thank you. This is what's going to force me to get name checked.
Okay. So now we can dive into the let's see. So Maggie just told us before you arrived, Steve, that she needs to leave at 7.
Okay.
There is a vote, item 6 on my agenda. I'm not looking at the formal. Is that the lineup? Item 6.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end, I'd like to do that before Maggie has to leave.
Perfect.
And Lisa had asked for item 5, this discussion of social media outreach. But since she's not here, unless somebody else is burning to talk about that, I suggest we defer that to a future meeting. Okay. So I'd like to move that response to the October 10th op-ed forward. We could discuss that for 5 to 10 minutes now and vote on whether to respond as a committee, if that's okay, and then move into spending the balance of our time on updates from the working groups. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you got a chance to read the op-ed that's that picture there for you. And I thought there were some statements in the op-ed which mischaracterized the work that the committee is doing, and there are aspects of it which are, a valid opinion and something that should be voiced about opposition to potential actions this committee might take, but hasn't taken yet. And so I think that's the thing that was unclear. So I drafted a response. I'd like to send it on behalf of the committee, which would require a vote in support, but also open to any edits or suggestions at this point. So let's spend, not too long discussing this.
Mr. Chairman, I only had one suggestion for consideration. In the second paragraph per sentence, we also recognize that what works for another community, instead of citing Boston specifically, may not necessarily work for Milton.
Sure.
The thought might be broader than just one municipality, and we don't want to think that Boston or any other municipality doesn't have some good things that we could look at and borrow from. So just
I'll admit that I learned about this Birdo tax plan from this op-ed. So I will thank the resident who wrote it for educating me further on this issue.
Is this typical for committees that are reflected in opinions to respond?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
is it typical for a committee that is, characterized in a op-ed to respond to it?
Certainly fair.
I mean, I think if there's something that's really bothersome then, or something that needs to get cleared up, I think we should.
Right, my goal with this is, I don't think the committee should be getting into shouting matches with residents who have a different perspective. So I just trying to focus in on, I thought that the op-ed suggested that this committee has already created an ordinance that will raise taxes, similar to what's being done in Boston. And that's not the case, so I want that to be clear. Hopefully that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, I do think though some people what I've heard are a little confused about our committee, because they do think it's basically sustainable Milton. So there is a little bit of confusion out there. So I try to explain that when I talk to someone that we are two distinct different groups, and we have a different charge. So I think just we should be aware that people are just wondering. They're not familiar. It takes a while for people to pay attention and get caught up to speed.
Are they in opposition in any way?
No, not in opposition. No.
I'm just curious.
Yes.
Make sure we're not saying something.
I'm sure when we start getting into really substantive actions, there will be people on both sides of each one of them.
And the dialogue would be healthy. This
dialogue is healthy.
To me reflects the committee being open to dialogue with anybody.
Yeah, no, I think we're committed to engaging the town in an open dialogue, and that includes people who are not yet fully convinced that dramatic action should be taken.
Well, I think it does highlight that when we get to the actions sections, it should be clear about where there'll be potential improvements and reductions, as well as potential increases, and hopefully they offset. But this just goes to show something that we need to make sure we're aware of and put details in about where we might impact something with our suggestions.
Yeah, to Maggie's point, you're referencing sustainable Milton in this, and we're trying to differentiate ourselves from sustainable Milton.
Well, that wasn't my intention, but I take your feedback. If you'd like to, I think that website has got a lot of useful resources, and that's where it is, right? Our committee doesn't have a website.
Right.
We could buy a domain name and rebrand that website, and I'd be totally comfortable with that. In the short run, do you think what do you think the trade-off is between taking this opportunity to point people at a resource that might give them more understanding of what we're thinking about, or avoiding the kind of brand confusion?
Or do we host any documents from the Climate Action Planning Committee today on sustainable Milton? Not just talking about like state plans, but the charter of the committee, the work groups. So there really isn't anything for the community to follow other than the meetings on the third Thursday of every month.
That's right.
Okay.
And we have a page on the town website.
Yeah, then we have a page in it.
Has that update gone through yet? I had some updates for that.
No, not yet. We also do have a sustainability and resiliency webpage too, but that's not explicit to this committee. That's sort of just a more broad.
Yeah. So think it's a separate issue that we should talk about, how we set up our web presence and make sure that there's like a lot for people to find there.
Well, I think if there's a confusion or a concern, right? Residents not sure what's going on, maybe they're confused between Sustainable Milton and the Climate Action Planning Commission. Would it behoove us to at least have two documents? Your, what I'll call kind of the charter document, which talks about the work groups and, you know, what's on the mitigation side, what's on the reduce side, and the people in the committees, number one. Number two would be your update to the select board, and just reference those two documents for residents to be able to follow what's happening in the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I can reword this to mention our update and then say Sustainable Milton also has resources here.
I was wondering,
They're different.
on the point that's been raised, which is a good one, if it might mean something to the effect we encourage all residents to learn more about how they can reduce damaging impacts of climate change, period. One resource would be, so that doesn't appear that the only one is Sustainable Milton. But it's one resource, and it's a Milton resource, but it doesn't preclude people to go from going to others, if that makes sense to folks.
Yeah, I think my question, that's a good suggestion, Arthur. My question really is around how the community can keep up with us besides watching us on TV. And is there a source document, kind of source of truth of here's what we're working on that would be helpful here? Wouldn't seem like a big effort to upload two documents onto the website, point people towards there, and then say, oh, by the way, there's a whole bunch of other great stuff on Sustainable Milton.
So the report I put together for the select board was my attempt to give an overview of where we're at.
Great document. Yeah, great document.
I'm not sure I'm ready to keep it up to date month by month, just because I'm not always I'm not always sure that I've got like a crisp picture of it myself. So I mean, I think that's something that we're working towards, right? Having a really succinct
What is on the one page
exactly
town website? What does it say there?
It's very brief. Yeah, I think a lot of the committee web pages are very brief. But it has agendas and minutes, and it has overview. The select board approved the confirmation of Climate Action Planning Committee.
I think that's the old one.
It says the charge.
When I clicked through, that was the link that came up live on the website.
I'm just saying, I had given you a rewrite for it. I don't think that's gone up yet, though, right?
If that's not, no, if this is not what you updated, then no. But yeah, it just kind of has a brief overview of, the charge, who's on the committee. That's usually
Would it be a big deal to put the documents that Matt is talking about on that page?
It has been a bit of a challenge to just coordinate on updating the page, I'd say.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, no,
Because it has to go through town staff, and Jack's very busy with his day job.
two pages would be very doable though.
We can do it in the near future. So should we include a link to our landing page? And
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And Sustainable Milton is kind of a secondary resource if folks really want to educate themselves.
Yeah.
We can put a link to the community page that we have on our website for resiliency and sustainability, which discusses a lot of the different projects that we have going on.
Yeah, and so part of the confusion is on the DPW's website. They do have a Sustainable Milton page. So I think that's why people are confused. So, a question I have is, or someone asked me really, was how come Sustainable Milton, which is a completely separate entity you know, is a, what is it, a 501(c) or, and how come they're on the actual town website? And does that, and that being there, does it cause other 501(c)(3)s to want to be on our town website too? So, you know, which way do we want the average Milton resident to go? Do they want to go to the town of Milton under boards and committees to Sustainable Milton? Or do we want to go to under departments, Public Works, Sustainable Milton?
I think I tend to view it as people find information on the web through a lot of different pathways, and it's good for them to be able to find Sustainable Milton from the town website, or to find it by going to sustainablemilton.org. It's a public-private partnership. The Sustainable Milton has worked closely with the town through its whole history, because that's what it was created to do. And I was not around with Sustainable Milton when we got that landing page on the town website, so I don't know what the decision-making process was.
And I'm not sure if I have an opinion either. It was just somebody brought it to my attention, and I never noticed it, honestly, because I'm never on the DPW's webpage, to be honest with you. So it was just an interesting comment that somebody made, and I do believe that the more information is better. But is it just going to cause confusion, or the average resident going to think that our committee is doing, you know, what Sustainable Milton is doing? So that's it.
We're certainly pushing in the same direction.
Is there a section on Sustainable Milton website that talks about us?
Yes, so on that page that I linked, if you scroll down, you will find a carousel of all our meetings and a little blurb about us.
Which, while useful, I think is the potential for further confusion, since
this is the first time anybody's told me that it's a problem. So I'm thinking about it. I don't see the problem.
I think problem would be too far. I think just making sure that people are clear that there is a delineation, even though they're highly aligned.
There is a difference. I think that part of what we need to do, and this was item 5, right? What's our social media is just part of the outreach we need to do to make people aware that we exist. Right. I think we're making progress. If people have heard of us but are a little confused about how we're different from Sustainable Milton, that's better than last year. And you're right, it would be ideal if people completely understood the distinction. I don't think it's enough of a problem that I'd want to withhold useful resources at this stage. Or, like, I think for me, putting climate action planning committee stuff on a Sustainable Milton page and putting Sustainable Milton links on town website is just a way of helping people find all the stuff that's going on in town. That's
Did you just want to leave it at sustainablemilton.org as the source?
I think sustainablemilton.org, if they land there, they'll be a lot more confused. This is a separate website I set up last year to like laser focused on climate action, with more of a focus on what residents can homeowners can do themselves.
So I think the subtle change, and I think that Arthur mentioned, was just instead of one sentence that includes it saying resources such as our local resource of sustainable, with this link, just carve it out slightly so it's not.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that edit, as well as one of the reasons I like this link is that when people put like town website links or with all the long codes in them in the Milton Times, you can't click it, right? So I think approximately 0 people go to the computer and like type the whole thing in. So I liked that this is action.sustainablemilton.org. But I can also reference we have a page on the town website.
I would do that. I think you're right about people not probably clicking on the links, but maybe somebody might read town website, go to the town website, see our landing page, see 2 really simple documents explaining what we do. And then if they go to Sustainable Milton, they're probably reading it online and probably more eager to do more research anyways.
So this is a page on Sustainable Milton.
Yeah.
So can the URL from here, the URL that goes into this?
Well, this URL in the document points to this.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fortunately, even if we do include the town URL, it's actually it's a long but fairly readable
I
URL.
don't
It's
think you
not.
have to include the URL. I think you basically say, come to the town website
Yeah.
and see we have our own landing page on the town website. And people will find it.
Agreed.
So it sounds like general support for sending this op-ed with the edits we've just discussed that sort of, and I can wordsmith it later.
Is like a motion to that
I
effect?
would love a motion to that.
So I'll make the motion that, following this discussion, Climate Action Planning Committee, responds to the 1010 op-ed in the Milton Times, along the lines of, discussion on the subject.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you. Okay.
Was that an opposed that I saw?
Yeah.
Okay, I heard opposed and I saw a hand. I guess it was just going down.
And right after that, a siren.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, everybody. And now we can move into the fun part, which is everybody talking about what they've been doing. So why don't we move conservation up? Just so that Maggie can be here for the whole thing. So I suggest we go conservation, transportation, buildings, waste, and so forth. Okay, Ron, the floor is yours.
So not a whole lot of activity this past month. We completed our draft approach statement, which I talked about at the last meeting. I was able to meet with Arthur's help with the Conservation Commission, shared the report with them. They seem to be fine with it. They made one suggestion about looking at the effect of predatory actions by deer and other animals in our case study of Blue Hills, but by and large, they were supportive. So I think we're ready to take the next step, whatever that is. We have, a set of we have 3 goals that are supportive of the State Forest Action Plan goals. Our goals are to reduce the impact of climate change on private property abutting the Blue Hills and the Ponson River Valley, increasing the amount of shade trees in the town, and improving the tree stock in the Blue Hills. And we have strategies for achieving each one of those goals. And we also have a 2-year set of outcomes, which I think is very important and which I would urge our committee to include in each one of the other groups' proposals, because it gives some immediacy and some concrete next steps that can be taken. So we're at the point of waiting for others to join us, and then considering the more difficult problem of how we actually get this done. I mean, other than it being on paper, how do we get the funding and the resource support that we need? And it's not a lot, but it is something that, as a committee as a whole, I imagine other groups are going to have their own funding and research needs to get their plans off the ground. And so I think it's a big problem for us as a committee as a whole as to how we do that.
Anybody from the conservation working group want to, what have you called it?
Well, I've been playing around with the name change. I don't know, I've been playing around with the forest trees and watershed group or the trees, but lately I'm thinking of going back to the old conservation lands group. Plus, it gets in a way a little bit of the conservation commission, but the scope is much different.
Anybody who's been involved like to add anything?
One thing that I've sort of been thinking about, to Ron's point about funding, and I haven't really looked into it too much, but I know we have in town a affordable housing trust. And the Affordable Housing Trust actually gets, and can have a bank account, essentially, is my understanding. And they can work with different property owners in town, and they can seek funding, and they can seek advice. And so I kind of was wondering if there would ever be an appetite to set up something similar, sort of like the Milton Land Trust Committee or something like that, where we kind of works kind of like the Affordable Housing Trust. But the goal of the Affordable Housing Trust is to identify opportunities where we can, find some places to create some affordable housing. So I was just wondering, would we ever want to, or is it possible to create, a similar trust?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. My thought on that is, I'm assuming that each of the other committees are going to have their own funding needs, and that it would behoove us to try to take stock of the funding needs in total of all the committees, and then to try to consider different strategies for going after the resources that we need. So one strategy would be to set up something like you're talking about, and we would, have a frame of reference of what we would need to do that. And then we would have to look for some benefactor or donor or philanthropy that would be into supporting that idea. We have to flesh it out in a lot greater detail. The other approach would be, ad hoc. There are always grant opportunities that come up that can dovetail with some of the proposals that we have, that we can go after as separate committees or committees in tandem. But I think it's a problem that deserves maybe a separate agenda item the next meeting.
Yeah, because when I was looking around, I started Googling Milton Land Trust. And down at the lower end of Randolph Ave, many years ago, some neighbors purchased some land and they created their own land trust. And then they managed it themselves. And then it seems like that trust was taken over by this other more regional trust called like the Wildlands Trust, and they manage different trusts. But so I'm not very familiar with these land trusts, but I know I've been sort of paying attention to the Affordable Housing Trust and kind of am seeing what they are doing, and they are working with different property owners in town, such as the Governor Stoughton Trust. And I was sort of thinking, if you think back of what the Governor Stoughton land was, it was all land for the poor and of Milton. And years ago, before they sold it off, the trustees sold it off, I walked up there on a pretty extensive tour, and there were lots of lady slippers and all the native wildflowers. So we should be looking to find places in town where we can try and purchase and preserve. And maybe we don't even need to start our own land trust, but a lot of times the Affordable Housing Trust, and maybe we could join up with the Affordable Housing Trust. And if we find some land that we could put some affordable units, we then also could designate some of the land on that property to be preserved for open space or walking trails or something. So I don't want to appear that like we're in competition with the Affordable Housing Trust, but I just noticed that they're set up to be able to seek funding and work with different people in town.
I don't know I don't know much about trusts, but what little I do know is that a lot of them relate to concrete physical things like land and property. And for climate, I don't know whether the trust is an appropriate format for us as much as maybe an endowment, because we're not really, in a sense, we're talking a little bit about property, and we're talking about a lot of other things, energy, transportation, waste, that come under the rubric of climate. So maybe trust is not the right format.
Arthur, did you want to make a comment?
I did. This is a very important topic that Maggie's placed on the table, and it's been on the agenda of the Conservation Commission chair this past year. There is a need for the town to be moving in this direction, as has been the case in other communities. And it would seem that we have 3 entities that have a mutual concern and interest in this activity, which could include a number of tools. For example, some of the financial resources might not necessarily be for the outright purchase of land per se, but for the incentiving of the establishment of a conservation restriction that would keep the land open in perpetuity. And the 3 entities that might collaborate on this would be this committee, as identified with Ron's subgroup of the Conservation Commission and the Open Space Committee. And maybe it would be worthwhile to have all 3 somehow come together at some point in time to have a discussion on the subject and see what common recommendations might be for next directions to take, one of which might very well be moving collaboratively rather than individually with the CPC
Yeah, that's the fourth, right?
That would be, will have to be the funding source.
Yeah,
And having a long-range plan, recognizing the fact that we only yield about $1 million a year in CPC monies and have a very high demand for that. So just a thought for consideration. The one other thing that I just wanted to have some now lose sight of is that there are two very extensive parcels of land that are not owned by the town of Milton. The DCR properties in the Blue Hills and the DCR properties in the marsh. Milton owns 33 acres of marshland. All the rest is owned by Department of Conservation and Recreation, just like the Blue Hills, which is about 2.7 square miles in the town of Milton. So maybe we need to just, in our wording, to direct out external audiences so that they understand this and where the emphasis would be in terms of like, with an open space initiative, that would be in the town of Milton proper, particularly if we use Milton financial resources like those that are available from CPC and influence as best as possible funding initiatives by DCR, the Blue Hills, and a portion of the marshland that they own. Again, just a thought. For what it's worth. Up to you thoughts what they were. I may not be with.
I'm just watching the time and I want to move us on to the next topic soon, but entertain another comment or two.
I have two naive questions perhaps. Does Milton have an endowment or some body that collects funds to support planting of trees? I know they go through and provide opportunities for people to have new trees on their property, but is there a way for people to donate funds to allow more of that, or is that on some other budget? And second, I didn't quite understand of the three sort of areas for the conservation committee for the private property, what would be the types of actions that you were considering for people's private property that abut the Ponset or the Blue Hills?
I think there would be a study done that would result in kind of a relooking at insurance rates, property taxes, abutment kinds of things that would ease the burden of people owning property that abuts those two areas and makes them more vulnerable to climate change.
Can I summarize the three strategies from your plan as I've entered them into our main table here? So one was collect baseline information on the current carbon stock and the composition and demographics of Blue Hills tree species.
Right.
So that's a study. Increase the town budget and services to support the planting and care of shade trees, which sort of speaks to your first question. And I think Jack has made some progress on that, or is working on something. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. I thought you told me you've done something there. And then third, conduct an assessment of expected future costs and damages due to climate change on 100 properties abutting the Blue Hills and the Ponset River Valley. So that's what Ron just mentioned.
Yeah, the first one is not just a study. It's been it'll result in recommendations for improving the carbon stock of the trees in the Blue Hills.
And I just heard a lot of discussion of establishing a trust for the purpose of securing land to put in conservation status. That could be, this is just proposals at this point. So if we're talking about it, we might consider putting it in here.
Yeah, but I just would like to also reemphasize my earlier point that the conservation land group's proposal be seen within the context of the proposals that I presume are going to emanate from the other 4 or 5 working groups. And that in addition to a trust for land, that we consider some sort of some sort of climate specific endowment that could help support all of these groups.
We'll also add, I went to a webinar today hosted by the Environmental Business Council on grant programs at the federal and state level to support climate action work. They're going to mail out the deck within 5 business days, so I didn't really grasp enough detail to repeat it here, but there were many, many different programs from FEMA, from NOAA, from the state of Massachusetts. So I think working, hopefully finding, consulting support or just somebody in the community who could sort of help us navigate the landscape of grants and apply for them in a timely manner. There certainly were a lot of grant programs to fund studies that, like the kind that you're proposing.
DOE has another set of grants that I don't know if you've gone to the toolkit.climate.gov, but there's a lot for community on that website.
Awesome. And with that, I'll move us on. Thank you, everybody.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Arthur might know this. I know at one point the town contemplated hiring a grant, writer. Did that ever get funded, or did that ever? Because I do feel like that's a position that the whole town could benefit from. Someone who specifically is looking for grant. You remember?
We definitely don't have one. I think there was like a freelance grant writer that somebody connected me with at one point. He gave me the contact info for, who's worked with the town in the past, but that's as far as I've gotten. Okay, so next, shall we hear from the transportation working group?
Sure. Well, Lisa could talk, right? So, I'll say what I have, and then if you want to jump in on anything as well. So, we've, I believe, entered our goals and strategies that we're using as a reference point into the Airtable that you created, and we're using those as the guidelines for a document that we've started to pull together.
I only see goals. There's maybe one strategy.
Okay, so I guess maybe we need to close the circle on that one, then I guess pull the strategies now that we're putting into the document back into the Airtable. So in saying that, we have been reviewing a lot of other towns' transportation, and a lot of towns are using the term mobility, just because transportation, I think in a lot of people's minds, would be what we drive around and how we get places, versus mobility might branch that out to areas we're considering, such as vehicles the town uses, service vehicles, things we might suggest for local businesses, things like that. So we haven't come to any conclusion on that, but we may also consider a title change as we're going through this. And so at this point, we're taking those inputs and starting to put the document together, and we'll update the Airtable as well to put that in. But hopefully, I'm hoping that the working group can get together to get this current document to enough of a framework to send out for more general review and feedback before we get down into the details. Was my thoughts on that? Anything you wish to add?
Yeah, so for the mobility, when we're talking about new entrant types of vehicles and services, we're talking about, replacing the fleet that the town has with electric vehicles, or at least some portion of that, looking at the contracts we have with the buses and seeing what kind of language can be put into that to encourage non gas or diesel vehicles. So we're looking at it from how do we reduce, how do we change the fuel use, we don't have a great story yet for heavy vehicles, but as far as trying to, make sure all of our roads have gone on road diets or that are prepared for these alternate vehicles for bikes and pedestrians to encourage additional modes of transportation.
Yeah,
And what is a road diet for? I might not know.
So
asking for a friend.
Roads are what, 19 feet wide or lanes, to reduce it by a few feet to allow for a bike lane, for example. And then how do you protect that bike lane so people feel safe in actually using that rather than, so you might want to reduce the speed limit on the road or have some sort of more physical or type of distinction between the bike lane and the road rather than just a paint line.
So kind of like what Brook Road went through.
Yeah.
So, and related to that, also right now we've got kind of islands of where people can ride their bikes more safely, connected by where that's not as safe. So, creating, one of the things we looked at as a topic, we haven't really reviewed it yet, is the idea of creating maps. How do we connect different areas so you can actually take safe passage through different neighborhoods on these alternative modes and feel safe about getting there.
Milton has a bike infrastructure plan that proposes a solution to that problem.
The other piece we're trying to bring into this is the equity piece. So it's not just all the activity happening in one part of town versus another. We're talking about, electrification, where the port's going to be, how are they going to be integrated into the properties.
So maybe related to that, one thing I'll often hear, people want to be green or climate friendly is, let's add some electric vehicle charging to this project. And I think that in Milton, we need to be mindful that one of the big barriers to adoption for EVs is when people don't have a dedicated parking spot to charge in. And there are people in Milton who will have that problem. But compared to Boston or another dense urban area, we have less of that problem. There are a lot of driveways in Milton. And if you drop some EV chargers in the middle of a sea of driveways, that might not be the best place to put it, right? So I think we would need to begin by understanding who are the people in Milton for whom EV charging is a barrier, and where do they live, right? And then and let that inform any planning around where to encourage the development of EV charging or any sort of town-led approach. I'll also say there's a really interesting company that has started working with Boston, where they don't work with like big corporate entities or with towns to directly install EV chargers. Instead, they work with homeowners or building owners and basically run level 2 chargers from their panels to the street. So instead of having to go through a utility interconnection process, it's as complex as installing a dryer in the house. And so then the town's role is sort of creating the parking spaces where those chargers are. There's some controls on those so that they can be reserved for electric vehicles. But basically the expense is borne by the for-profit company. They do a revenue share with the building owner, and you get electric vehicle charging spots, sort of popping up around town. And the town doesn't need to be directly in the loop. So I thought that was exciting. The company's called It's Electric. So we should, see how that goes in Boston.
The other piece that we were talking about is providing other opportunities for transportation, other mobility options besides having to have a single vehicle per family. So looking at bus routes or other opportunities to bring in network vehicle options that would be lighter footprint for carbon use and less need to own one's own vehicle.
Can I just ask a question before I go? And I
Mhm.
think you might not know the answer now, but just for something to think about. The state of Massachusetts has kind of put in an aggressive mandate to implement as of January 1st under the Advanced Clean Truck Act that you cannot buy a diesel truck. But at the end of December, you can't buy a diesel truck unless you also offset that by buying a electric vehicle. And this applies to municipalities. So I know, I think just recently, a few days ago, they have extended that deadline by 1 year. So I kind of was wondering what the town of Milton's plan is to abide by this new ruling, because all of our heavier trucks are all diesel. And I know that like the Trucking Association of Massachusetts is opposed to this, and they're advocating for their reps to not abolish it, but give us more time, because when you have a larger truck, like a snowplow truck, the technology isn't necessarily there to be electric. So I just kind of was wondering if the town.
What's the name of this rule?
I think it's called the Advanced Clean Truck Act.
Okay.
So I just was wondering what the town of Milton's plan was, like especially, obviously the DPW, because that will impact our budget as well. And there's a lot of talk. It started in California, was adopted in California, and now it's coming this way. And there's just a lot of pushback, but I think it's going to eventually, come to fruition. But it's just an immense cost. Like an average truck, a new dump truck, sells for like $300,000. And so
Just a regular one?
Yeah. So how is a new electric truck going to impact our budget for the town? It's kind of a big deal. I think every year in our budget, the DPW is always looking to replace equipment. So it doesn't affect gas. So maybe the town is just going to get gas. But it's diesel. So that's just a question to put out there. Obviously not to be.
I think with the working group, we'll definitely take a look at that, because it could do some of the suggestions that we're planning to put in there, the work for us somewhat, but because some of the guidelines would be towards looking at these options anyway. So, but there are definitely quite a few electric truck options out there already.
Have you connected with the new DPW director?
That we have not.
You know his name?
I don't know his name.
Tom McCarthy is
McCarthy. So that's the starting point.
He's not officially the DPW director. He is the acting DPW director, as he's the director of consolidated facilities.
And there may be some energy changes too for the larger vehicles, like dump trucks, snow plows, and you get into trains. They're still looking at hydrogen vehicle options. So just because the batteries would have to be so large, or the range so short, that they're still looking for alternative fuels.
And two comments. last year we had a student work for us who did a survey of transportation that students use to go to school in Milton. And a large percentage of them drove big gas guzzling cars. And she noted that there was an opportunity there to do some student education. And the other kind of related question is, does the town have a contract with the school buses? And does it have any leverage as to what kind of buses they use?
We were talking about that exact idea in the committee and how looking at the contract language, if we can insert something so they move on to cleaner options.
That would be great. Every morning I'm stuck behind one of them.
And I've seen that the city of Boston has electric school buses, and you can't tell the difference from looking at them, but they obviously smell a lot better.
When we do sort of dig into the changing our habits around driving, certainly one of the goals, working backwards from the state goals, one of the goals is to limit the growth of vehicle miles traveled. So that the vehicle miles traveled per household is going down. And I think you ask people, like, would you like to spend less time in the car? The answer will probably be yes, right? But if I'm probably one of the more passionate climate advocates in town. I still drive my car everywhere, right? There's like there's multiple overlapping reasons why we choose the car as opposed to biking or taking the bus. And I think we will need to do more than just sort of wave the flag that driving less is good to really make it a viable option for people. And be strategic about it and take a long-term view as well. It's not something people are going to change overnight.
But that gets to land use.
Yeah.
And this town, it's very hard to change land use here from what I have found. And so if you look at the 15-minute city where you can get around and get most of the things you need by walking in 15 minutes, great. But I live in one of the few areas in town where I can walk and get most of those things, but most people don't have that option.
Yeah.
So unless we're going to really change where we can have amenities in town, that'll be hard.
And also think of what are the kinds of trips people are making, and can we tackle categories of trips? I know one that I think about a lot. I don't know how feasible this is, but your kids reach a certain age and you're just driving them all over the place, right? And at the same time, I want more autonomy for my middle school plus age kid. I wish my son could get from school to swim practice to the library to home without me worrying he's going to get hit by a car on Randolph Avenue. Yeah. If there was some kind of youth-friendly shuttle service that connected the major sports fields with the schools, with the library and other community centers, could that be a win for the sort of the youth culture in town and for the climate? So I'd love to look for strategic opportunities like that. I'm told that those shuttle services are breathtakingly expensive, but we should look into it.
So an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah.
But next year. You brought up the low-speed vehicle option too.
I think our select board chair brought that up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Question, and then a comment if I may. Will the committee be addressing, even if it's just recognizing the community as being a heavy cut-through community, and there are things over which the transportation committee can exercise control, and there are things over which
it will acknowledge
be able to just
drive through
conservation, DCI versus Milton. And then there's a cultural issue that's clearly on the table too. Ron was talking about the types of cars the kids are driving, and they're driving them alone. In some of the instances, you see this as you're going through town when they're going to school. Then there's really not a lot of carpooling.
No.
Get that
And
16.
part of it's because that after the next place after school is a really complex logistical problem.
I guess the
Right,
point-
so if I'm gonna carpool with somebody, we need to be coming from the same place and going to the same place later. Right?
Or you have a pool to get there and a different pool to leave there.
Right, then that's just work, right? It's, I think, a lot of people who'd be open to carpooling in principle haven't gotten around it in practice.
Or
For some
sports practice.
practical reasons, not just because they don't care about the climate.
It's complex,
Yeah.
but
The other thing I would assume, at least with our kids, is they take our cars. And so, right, I'm not gonna buy another car. So if it was a gas guzzler, when I bought it in 2016, it's their gas guzzler now. So, maybe some parents are buying their kids new cars, but I think a lot of them.
us having a vision,
Yes, they are.
blind student with an Eldorado with a big fin, V8.
Some of these are classics.
That's
Yeah.
it.
There is a big trend toward these scooters and electric bikes. And I see these scooters, a lot of kids use.
There's also a trend in crashes and fatalities
Yeah.
of people riding those pedestrians and people
Yeah.
using bikes and scooters.
Oh, you're no fun. Don't tell me the truth.
Yeah, sorry.
This cut through topic it's personal also. I mean, we live off of Randolph Road and it's, between talks of roundabouts and, you know, certain corners that are the most dangerous in the state, and the city seems to be doing nothing about it, or sorry,
Well,
the state
the
seems to be
Department of Transportation is
almost
doing
nothing
a
about it.
study.
Been doing a study for as
And
long
they've
as
been
we've
doing
been
a
in
study
town.
for as long as I've
8
lived here
years.
too, yeah.
Maybe one of the other things to consider mentioning is the impact of the 40Bs in the Transportation Committee, because they're all going to be coming online. We've got one at 711 Randolph Avenue with 90 units in it. You've got one down in East Milton Square with 90 units. One at 728 Randolph Avenue with 30-odd units.
They have a requirement though to have so many chargers in those units.
I don't know.
So I know at least one of them, because I was,
I'm just thinking as you're doing your work on the Transportation Committee, looking at not just what is now, but
The future.
yeah.
So, I think the Traffic Commission is a committee that you guys should be partnering with. Looking for win-wins. I think there's been a passionate group of, residents working on these sort of general traffic issues for a long time. Chase Berkeley was the chair, so I don't know who
what was
is leading it
the,
now.
what was the group? I'm sorry.
The Traffic Commission.
And the planning office should have an aggregation of all the additional units that are under construction, plan to be under construction. Because most of them have been approved, most of the 40Bs have been approved, is that not right?
What does that mean, 40 views?
This is like the Ice House project on Tulip Avenue with multi.
Oh,
Units.
multi-unit.
More affordable housing.
Oh,
Right, certain percentage of the 15% or so have to be affordable units.
And the 40B clause allows them to circumvent Milton zoning rules,
oh,
because we're underweight on affordable housing.
Which leads us to the new state law, which is the accessory dwelling units. You know, what that may mean in terms of additional transportation impact in the town. Because now it's by right. Like with the 40Bs.
And just to answer one of the things you mentioned about charging of those, I do know just with discussion with the inspector about the electrical inspector when we over installed my charging station, was that they seem to have they be using 5 or 6. Of course, they picked the one company that went and pulled out of the market a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but so hopefully they didn't buy them yet. Shall we move on to the?
Yes, We should.
Yeah, we're, I don't think we're gonna make it through all of these tonight at this
I'll
point.
try to be brief, but,
Yeah, what did we do on buildings?
I've entered a lot of stuff in the Airtable, so I just want to take this opportunity to share some of it, and so I'm not even connected to Zoom. I'm not going to be brief if I share my
Can't
screen.
flash it up there.
I would have to connect to Zoom, and I haven't even, I don't even have the link handy. So if you go into the state goals, Airtable, I found 30, related to buildings and electricity. But that's sort of breaking things down by numerical targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from residential buildings versus commercial and industrial versus municipal, by 2030 and by 2050, but they're sort of numerical targets for all of those. The 2050 target for emissions reductions from residential buildings is 95%. And the 2050 target for emission reduction from natural gas distribution is 72%. So it varies. You know, there's been kind of large scale macroeconomic studies to set targets on all these categories of emissions. And there are also targets defined for different categories of buildings implementing energy efficiency retrofits. So we've got a lot of, the vast majority of the buildings will have in 2050 exist already. And so by 2030, sort of roughly 25% of homes and commercial buildings need to re-insulate, reseal, new windows, these kinds of things. And getting up to sort of 65–70% by 2050. And all those buildings need to electrify as well. Right? And when I say need, again, this is the kind of language that led to the op-ed, right? There is a state legal mandate to reach these emissions targets. It binds the state to take specific planning actions. But there's no legal obligation on homeowners at this time. And my read on it is there will never come a time when the state has the political mandate to just say, you spend half the price of your home to stop using fossil fuels. The only way this succeeds is if the state can make it an attractive path for most people to go down. And I think they will work hard to make that true. And I think our role here is to make people aware of, if you say you're supportive of following the IPCC's recommendations on climate change, this is what it means, right? It means probably when your natural gas furnace dies, you should be prepared to replace it with an electric heat pump for 95% of houses. Most of us probably have another decade on our gas burner, right? So it's a matter of sort of knowing what are heat pumps and where would I get one, and how do I compare them in terms of operating costs, and how do I make it a good deal? I went from fuel oil to heat pumps this year, and it made financial sense, but it took a lot of work to see that. So can we reduce the barriers to entry for folks? So the main strategy that I'm thinking about in the building space is a program to facilitate folks who are ready to take these actions in the near future to make it as easy and successful and financially viable as possible for them. So that means connecting people with the incentives. It means providing coaching. So lots of the towns that are sort of leading on this have implemented coaching programs where they train usually volunteers, but also contract with their few companies working in this space that provide independent support for people who are going through these kinds of home renovations. Say you're thinking about it, they'll help you find a list of vetted contractors. Then once you've got quotes, they'll give you an independent view on the quotes, whether they're a good fit for your house, whether the price is reasonable. Right, so it was something like Electrify Milton. Right, in the past we've done Solarize Milton. This would be bigger than that because it would encompass solar, energy efficiency upgrades, heat pumps, and anything else, EV charging that sort of fits into this bucket of building electrification. I think in the near term, we'll have a lot more success with carrots than sticks, right? Because scolding people or threatening people with tax increases when the barriers to adoption are so high as they are now is just a recipe for conflict, I think. And yeah, maybe when the state's got the price of electricity down relative to gas, and these technologies are much more widely adopted, then you can start kind of pushing people in that direction. And you won't get a huge backlash if it's feasible. So anyway, that's kind of where my head's at.
Is there a conversion for boilers, like steam heat, or do you just have to?
Well, I have a fuel oil boiler, so I had hot water heat going to radiators. No, so the hot water radiators no longer distribute heat in my house.
So you have to get a whole new ductwork put in.
I got mini splits where I didn't have ductwork. Yeah.
As another example, we did a heat pump install with the high velocity style. So you don't see anything on the inside or the outside, except for little holes in the ceiling.
Right.
Just two things. One is that now there's a program for hot water heat pumps. And some people are starting to learn there's a water heat that needs to be replaced before the boiler. It's an opportunity for them to come into a better understanding. And the second is, heard recently that some of the companies recognizing there are so many people in the metropolitan Boston area that have second homes, that if they have the same supplier for both of their properties, they're working on arrangements whereby energy created at one can be transferred to the other, or financial credits can be issued from one property to the other, and so on down the line. I don't know if you've run into that. I've just heard about it recently.
When we did solar panels, Eversource is both places, but Eversource New Hampshire is not the same as Eversource Massachusetts. Right. So there are limitations to that, but yes, they do that within.
Are you talking about community solar plans, basically, where you subscribe to?
Well, the direct program was literally if I owned, let's say, had a second house in Western Mass. Yeah. And it was also Eversource. I could any overproduction could benefit that place, but it has to be on the network that supports it.
Same state, same carrier, right?
Right. So it's what was my understanding, but even that might not be completely true with how they handle it.
It's kind of my way is new, so.
Yeah. You can sell it. You can sell it to a neighbor.
I haven't seen anything right.
Yeah, if we overproduced, we could sell it to our neighbors, for instance.
Yeah. So I didn't have the right summary in front of me, so I kind of went deep on Electrify Milton, and that's the top priority in my mind. But let me just list the strategies that I've entered into the Airtable briefly, and I won't go into detail on it, but in addition to doing some kind of Electrify Milton program, increasing the additional green energy component in the town's community electricity aggregation program, from 10 to 25% in 2027. We missed our chance. We just renegotiated a new contract this year and missed a chance to slowly ramp up the default clean electricity option. But if we were at 25% in 2027, we'd be close to 100% clean electricity for the default participant by a very permissive definition of clean, but still it's pretty good. And the incremental costs to residents would be quite small at second, opt into the property assessed clean energy financing program. This a loan program for commercial properties to finance clean energy upgrades on attractive terms. And I learned after putting this in there that Milton has opted into that. So maybe the strategy is promoting it. Advocate for homeowners to participate in community solar plans. So this is when you can't actually get solar on your home. There's still ways for you to access savings associated with the value of renewable energy credits from solar. So it's actually a way for residents to save money and help finance renewable electricity. Advocating for policies that limit the cost of electricity in Massachusetts. I mean, this is not under our control, but today, all the investments in grid infrastructure are paid for by our electric bills, and the pricing model is just sort of everybody pays the same, right? Which we need a lot of investment in the grid to electrify everything. But if the price of electricity goes wild compared to fossil fuels, then this is not going to happen. So something we should advocate for at a policy level. Establishing municipal building policies that appropriately consider the long-term costs and risks of fossil fuels. The utilities' own projections have the price of fossil fuel doubling or tripling over the next 2 decades because there's a significant overhead cost to maintaining the distribution system, but as the number of people buying gas declines, they'll bear more and more of that cost. So if you buy natural gas appliance with a 30-year timeline because natural gas is marginally cheaper than electricity today, you might regret that. So just something to bake into the town's processes. And developing distributed renewable energy resources locally in Milton. So in the past, we've almost built some wind power. Can we make it easier to develop solar projects or just do residential solar or wind power on homes? So that's not exhaustive, but that's what I've come up with so far.
Does the town have a plan for redoing its windows and heating systems from its building?
I don't know. I think somewhere in here I put in a target for doing a capital plan for energy efficiency upgrades.
Tom would want this if facilities consolidated facilities department.
Okay, so apologies to everybody who's getting squeezed here. Who's next? Waste.
Be very quick. This process began, I guess last January. Jack and I, as it evolved, we met with people like the DPW director, participated in an audit together. Tim Johnson, upon joining the committee, the Climate Action Planning Committee, came on the subcommittee for waste, and we have three other members, I think all of Sustainable Milton, for a total of 6 of us working together, including Jan. And we obtained a lot of documentation and so on down the line. You know, the past couple of meetings, we had a number of discussions that have led to a distillation of work since January in this particular document, which I'll get around to everybody and ask you, recognizing your time, if you could take a look at it offsite and email Kim and I with any comments, recommendations, suggestions, and so on down the line. They're most welcome. We'll have our next meeting, Kim, on the 18th with the working group, and at that time we hope to recognizing this is a draft document only. In that working group meeting, we hope to polish this document up and get it closer to a finished product for the climate action planning committee. Tim, anything that you want to add?
No, I think that's good, Arthur. Like, I thought that was a good draft, but I'm interested to hear people's comments.
I guess in the interest of squeezing in another update, I'll move us on, but people should give feedback. I think you've circulated this by email, right?
Not to this.
Not to the whole group?
Yeah,
okay.
I will, working group and you.
I will take a follow-up to enter these goals into the Airtable where everyone can see them.
Okay.
And then I think folks should feel free to send feedback to the working group.
And they may be modified after the working group meeting.
Just always, we're a quorum at 6, so if there are 6 voting members of the Climate Action Planning Committee on an email thread, like getting into it, then we should stop. But any less than 6 of us, you can, this is a complicated research project, so go ahead.
Right. So the comments to Kim and I would come from you individually.
Right.
Rather than as a group.
Okay, this is great. And I know I've had it in my email for a week, but it's hard to read. So I'm glad to have it printed out. Heat waves.
Yes, I can speak to that. I can give a very brief update. So John Godleski, who was the previous member on the CAPC, he had done a lot of work on heat waves already. So I met with him. He shared all his notes with me and connected me with all the emails he had sent to stakeholders and things like that. I took his key action recommendation document that he had made and updated it with some new content. I'm specifically doing more research on vulnerable populations, specifically folks of color, and the inequities that exist within that population as it relates to heat waves. In terms of connecting with stakeholders, I reached out to the director of Milton Council on Aging, and she recommended I speak with Lieutenant Charles Caputo, who's the emergency management director of Milton. He has stepped away from his position, so he referred me to Deputy Mark Alba, who I reached out to last week. And I think once I connect with him, I will be able to move forward on a lot of the strategies I'm working on, which I'll share quickly. One is to enhance public awareness and education about heat waves. I'd love to get that out there to the vulnerable population, specifically the elderly population, and folks of color. And 2 is improve access to cooling resources. 3, protect and maintain tree canopy and green spaces which overlaps with the conservation group work. And 4, strengthen emergency response systems, which I think Deputy Mark Alba will be able to assist with quite a bit. Sorry, that was very quick.
Thank you.
Right. Efficient.
And wildfire and drought work together or no?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe Fiona, I'll kick off and maybe you can talk about drought. Okay, so we merged the two work groups. So Fiona, Kyle, Reagan, and myself working on both. Wildfire update. Met with Karen Lothrop of the DCR. She's the fire warden for our district, and Chief Patton. And just kind of output from that meeting were a couple of things. One is that there's some great data, whether it's on wildfires. Drought data is actually quite robust already, but specific to wildfires within the town of Milton, there's great data going all the way back to 2002. Everything in the Blue Hills, everything in residential or town land has been recorded. So there's a great data set there. The second kind of insight was really good collaboration between DCR and the fire team in Milton. And three is that there's lots of policies with regard to fires. One as an example would be escalation. So how Chief Madden thinks about bringing in other towns to help fight wildfires, whether they be in the Blue Hills or whether they be in residential or conservation land, and also escalation between, let's say local fire and DCR. So very good escalation policies. Second is that really their policy is around suppression. And what that means is if there's a wildfire, put that wildfire out, which makes sense. But that doesn't really leave any room for what we would call forest management plans, right? Things like controlled burns. So there's been a lot of work done on forest management plans on behalf of DCR, but I would call these policies all unofficial recommendations at this point. So there might be a wildfire burning in the evening, let's say, where it would be dangerous to bring local firefighters out into the Blue Hills as an example. And so their DCR may take a decision to actually, in a controlled way, let that fire burn, knowing two things. One is it's safer for local firefighters not to be in the Blue Hills during an evening firefight. And number two is that it's actually regenerative for the land itself. Again, these are kind of unofficial policies, but with lots of recommendations. I would then say we were also directed to a number of documents to review. I would suggest that the state information around wildfires, at least in terms of state goals, is quite lean. So no official state goal that I saw for climate management in the state plan. There are some for drought, but for wildfires, I would say pretty lean in terms of state goals, but lots of documents circulating on what I would call community wildfire preparation plans. So we were directed to a couple of different towns to review those, Cape Ann, and also I think it was the Vineyard had a very good plan. And these are locally done with funding and lots of resources and lots of experts around the table designing plans for local actions to be ready for wildfires. And the second would be, again, some of these very strong recommendations from the DCR in what I would call wildfire management plans. Again, these are the recommendations, but not necessarily official policies or official actions taking place in the Blue Hills or in residential properties. So reviewed those and then entered in, I think, 2 goals for wildfire and 3 strategies under each of those. So 5 or 6 total strategies for wildfires. Fiona, maybe you could jump in on drought.
Sure, I'll be really brief because we haven't done nearly as deep of a dive into drought. But one thing that we did find is that both Milton and the state have really pretty comprehensive plans when it comes to drought, in terms of, especially the state has a very comprehensive drought monitoring system, and also comprehensive sort of recommendations for everyone, sort of from municipalities to individuals, when it comes to dealing with drought at different levels. So to some extent, drought seems relatively well covered, which I guess is nice news for us. But yeah, I will just say, sort of in both of these, mitigation and adaptation areas, there's big crossovers, especially with again the conservation committee, obviously with both wildfires and drought. So, but yeah, I think that we did end up entering 1 or 2 goals for drought. I think, but Kyle was the one who did that. So,
thank you, guys. And I'll just say, as sort of a general update related to the adaptation areas. I set up a informational discussion with a representative of a company called First Street that is sort of emerging as the sort of leading provider of physical climate risk data to governments, both local and regional, and also financial institutions, for-profit enterprises. And lately, if you see sort of risk projection articles in major media, or impact of climate risk and insurance, this sort of thing, they'll always get cited. So they have a data product that provides a wide array of risk metrics on these dimensions that we're looking at, down to the property level, but also aggregated to towns and regions. That's available. I think entry level sort of $10,000. Goes up from there, but less than 100K. I think data sources like that will be useful for us in sort of ranking where we focus, because we started with the list of the kinds of climate risks that are relevant globally, that I think regionally they're not all equal, right? So it'd be good to get access to that. But I came away from that meeting with the conclusion that it'd probably be better to get a group, like a regional group together, or find a nonprofit to work with that can pool funds, get access to that data, and make it available to towns regionally. Because I think if we go, it would be hard to come up with that kind of money in Milton, and then if it's just for use by Milton, I think the chance that it would be underutilized is, the risk it would be underutilized is pretty big. So that exists, and something I'm thinking about, finding a way to get out here. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This was great. I'll try to get better at my time management over time. Arthur, you have a comment?
It's a lot of meat on the table.
Yes.
Plans for the videotaping that run on you, and Maggie, et cetera.
Maybe Jack can tell us what to expect there.
I haven't received a time frame yet, and I think he was they were here today. I don't know if everybody noticed, especially on Zoom. They got some B-roll footage of the meeting, and then they're going to get some shots of around different areas of town that they think would be meaningful for this committee. So I don't know if you guys have any ideas of what you want to get filmed, but yeah, that's that. And so then probably at least a couple months before the editing is done.
And the action plan would be, once the product is finished.
We should definitely post about it on social media. There's probably other things that we could do. Yeah.
Hopefully we have a plan for that sometime soon.
Yeah. So next month we'll talk about social media outreach.
I think, well,
Come with your best tweets.
I would put it in the context of social marketing outreach. It's more than just social media.
I agree.
Yeah.
I like that switch.
But my other question is, so Arthur's group came out with something similar. What we did is the idea that everybody eventually will produce something like this, or what's the process?
I'm late for a meeting, so I can't possibly answer that question. I'm struggling with that. Exactly how we get it all organized into a coherent document.
Yeah.
That people want to read too.
I will.
Yeah.
I'll continue, beating the drum for the Airtable. I think it's valuable to collect it in a central place where we can do more than just read it, but also sort of filter and review systematically. Because one of the problems we had last year is there are a lot of documents like that floating around, and we had trouble just storing them in a place where people can find them. But I think there are a lot of ways we might tackle this. So we should keep talking about it. With that, I will entertain motions to adjourn, but if you have another question, please ask me.
No, it would be great to have a concrete proposal that incorporates all the suggestions from the different working groups that we could use for funding, for promotion, for education. And I think if every working group does something like this, it shouldn't be hard to do.
Yeah. And it seems pedantic, but it really, finding stuff is so hard in modern life, that there's just so much digital content. So we need to be super consistent about where we put stuff and then point people to it. And so I would recommend there's a CAP committee, Google Drive that I shared with you guys in the first meeting this year. Make sure that these documents are in the working group folder, and I can help make that happen if you need help. But make sure it's there and sort of like clearly named so that people, if there's one document that you want people to read, if they only read one, and they will only read one if they read any, make sure it's clear which one it is. There can't be sort of 8 old ones next to it, or people will get confused.
I can't resist. Maybe in the agenda for the next meeting, Alex, we would have almost a review of all of Airtable in a way where the groups can provide the voiceover. We can look for overlaps, or I'm doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. So where the gaps are and where the overlaps are. It probably will take more than one, but just some way for us to see how the groups are integrating across all the different work groups.
I've made a note of that.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, it's always the same guys.
I was trying to get in there and I couldn't do it because.
Resist. No, I was on it too fast.
We rehearsed. Do we have it? Everybody?
All in favor of
All in
adjournment?
favor?
All in favor, all opposed? All right, thought not. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.